Welcome back to video number 3 of this multi-part series that I've been doing so far that is discussing all of the stuff between EMMURE and myself between the beginning and 2015, my departure. For this video, I want to discuss albums 1 through 4 because so much transpired between albums 1 and 4 and all the touring, all the different things that came with it, the trials, tribulations, the recording process, influences, things we had to do to make it happen, plus more. So stick around. Thank you again, folks. We're going to go ahead and start talking about pretty much where we left off in the last video, from getting signed at Victory and then the momentum moving forward and then all the way up to album number 1. So it all began when we had a few songs, some parts written for Goodbye to the Gallows, the first record. There was a few things we wrote on, we didn't have a computer yet for that album, so we were doing it live, in person. We were jamming in Connecticut at Ben and Joe's house, or their parents' house. So we would stay up there and write and pretty much finish writing that album, mostly leaving little odds and ends. And then we basically negotiated with Tony from Victory Records, hey, we want to record with Zeus in Massachusetts at Planet Z Studios. We were super hyped up. Zeus has done a lot of really epic stuff. Again, Blood Has Been Shed, Hatebreed. There's a number, Shadows Fall. He did a ton of bands that sounded really, really good. And we were like, okay, this guy has his stuff together. This man is awesome. And we like the punchiness of his drums, the full-on production, vocal production. We all agreed on it. So we talked with Victory, and the way it works usually with labels is you kind of go back and forth. And it'll go to the label, to the producer, negotiating the price, negotiating the terms of how long it's going to take to record, and all the things. So when we were about ready to have a record recorded, that's when we went and did it. So he was in, I think, Holyoke, Massachusetts, or Springfield. I think Holyoke, which is on the western side of Massachusetts, not too far from Connecticut, where we would practice. So we went up there, and Zeus's studio, right next to it, had a little house where the bands would stay during the time of recording, like 10 paces, basically. You're in the studio, and then 10 paces you're out the studio and back into this little house. So for album 1, Goodbye to the Gallows, we stayed there. And again, we didn't have much money. We got a budget from the record company. We still were like not really working because we were putting so much time into recording or writing to record. And that was the focus. So we were still pretty broke, and still, you know, using a little budget that we had left over from the first record that Victory gave us to buy some groceries. And again, you had 5 of us, so it was like hundreds of dollars in groceries a week for like a minimal amount. And, you know, we did our best. At that time, this is very interesting, we had, I think, our first band van. I wish I had photos of them. We had 2 band vans we ended up going through over time. The first one ended up being such a clunker, you know, thanks to my dad co-signing for it. We couldn't even afford it, so we paid it off. And then basically that van ended up springing holes in the exhaust right where the shifter would be. So, you know, most mechanical shifters, like on the column from older vans, this is like a 93, they have just a cable that shifts the transmission. And the cable had like a nylon plastic end, and the hole in the exhaust burnt that. So not only was the van super loud and annoying and got gas inside of it as we drove around and toured the first 2005-ish, 6, 7 with this van, we'd have to keep the windows open no matter how hot or how cold it was, and drive so we didn't suffocate and die. We would buy Arizona iced tea cans for $1, and we would clamp them on the muffler or the exhaust that was leaking, and it would last like maybe about 6, 7, 8 hours of driving, and then it would blow another hole in it. And what it did was it broke the shifter cable. So on my life, someone would have to climb under it to take it out of park while the driver's on the brake and shift it into drive, and then move it out of the way, and we jump in and go. And I'm talking like we would have to make U-turns in awkward spots, stop, somebody jump out, put it in reverse, move out of the way of the van backs up, stops, somebody jumps under the van, shifts it. And again, this is how dedicated we were. We didn't have the money to fix this. Like I knew it wouldn't be a lot of money, and I was mechanically inclined, but we were like, let's just shift it with our hand and figure it out and spend $2 at a time on drinks, Arizona drinks we could have, and then wrap around the exhaust with these clamps. And that's what we ended up doing. So that was part of it, driving up from Queens, New York to Connecticut, back and forth, writing the record, and then going up to Massachusetts, running around Massachusetts with this loud van that we had to shift with our hand. And if I remember, I don't know if that one or the second record that we did was in the winter, but it was rough because you'd have to lay on the floor in the snow. Like, this is what we did. But anyway, Zeus was really, really good producer. He, you know, when we had songs that weren't really finished, we would work on stuff with him and figure out ideas to repeat parts, change parts, and stuff. And again, Frank was always an integral part to that. You know, he wrote the lyrics, put the song titles, really came up with the album concept with Victory, and we kind of were really like the meat and bone, like the meat of it, writing the songs, and we would kind of go back and forth. So we all kind of collaborated with Ben, Joe, Mark Davis, and we, you know, finished writing and recording that record, and it came out amazing. We had a lot of, you know, guest people, not a lot, but maybe 3 or 4 guest vocalists. Carl, the singer of Misery Signals, was on there. Our boy Tyler Guida from My Bitter End was on there. We had a few different people on there, and again, that was album number 1 with Zeus, and that was a pleasure to record. It was pretty much easy. All the songs came to us. That's just the vibe we had. We wanted melodic. We wanted super heavy. You know, and at that time we were doing smaller tours, playing with a lot of bands in VFWs and places where, you know, just people just stood there and all they wanted to do was mosh. So, you know, we were like, we want to do that, but we want to stand out a little. We want to do very moshy parts, but we also want to, you know, get there with melodic parts that really hit you. So again, thank you to all the fans and people that love Sleeping Princess and Devil's Castle. All these songs, Rusted Over Wet Dreams, songs that are just like super melodic but get super heavy, just kind of this good balance. And, you know, we learned a lot from touring and playing shows with other bands and kind of picking and choosing from our influences what we want to really sound like. And that began the ultimate sound of EMMURE, I would think. All right, so album 2, The Respect Issue, same circumstance. What I could add into that is that this is a little different because this record we didn't write at Ben and Joe's house in Connecticut. This record we actually wrote at a studio in Whitestone that was oddly a lawnmower repair shop that also had a bunch of studios. And like us, our friends in the band Enwell, Stifling Neglect, there was so many bands. Everybody Gets Hurt, I believe, the hardcore band from Queens. They practiced there, I think. Don't roast me, I'm trying to remember. This is so long ago. But there was a lot of really cool bands that practiced there and a lot of cool people. And we went there, and Ben and Joe lived in the studio. They didn't go home to Connecticut. They lived in a studio on like an air mattress or like just slept on the floor or whatever it was for like, I don't know, I'm going to say 3 to 5 weeks. I don't want to lie or put words in their mouth of what happened. They slept at the studio. We would meet up and jam and play all day, walk up the block to Christina's Deli, which there's a photo right there, or there, wherever I put it, of us when we were a lot younger. And we would always just go to this 24-hour deli in Queens, which has the best delis in New York, of course. And we would just spend so much time at that studio. They would go to Frank's house or my house to shower. They would use the bathroom in the studio and shower like every other day, every other day we would go back. So like twice a week, 3 times a week, we would just go and they would be able to shower. But they really didn't shower that much. And we spent a lot of time in the studio, literally, you know, writing this record. So we wrote The Respect Issue, and then the same thing. We wanted to go with Zeus, and zip, right up to Massachusetts, lived in that house, and it was the same ordeal. And if I remember correctly, we had to sell a backup amplifier we had to be able to get groceries and gas for the truck. So we were like, it's not that Victory wasn't giving us money, it's just that these records costed so much. We only got so much money for signing for each record, and we had to distribute them. Whether it was for artwork to make the record, recording it, press, you know, stuff like that costs money, and that's where it came from. So we used money for that, and out of our pocket, we really did the best we can. And as far as touring during that time, now we were doing stuff a little bit bigger, like we were doing stuff like Darkest Hour, Bury Your Dead, Misery Signals again. Like we started like really starting to get traction playing some like 300 to 800 cap rooms, and it was pretty full. We were doing really good. And, you know, all these bands that we loved and looked up to, we started, I don't want to say we were doing better than them at that time, but their peak has kind of like hit the peak, and they were kind of like not as big as they were, and we were on the way up. So that's kind of what happened. That's what happens in music. We tour with a lot of bands that did that and towards the end, and that's just the way it goes, man. So we were very fortunate to get some really good tours that helped us out and supporting direct support roles or 3rd out of 5th, whatever it was. And at that time, again, we had that second van, but I think we got, or the first van, I think that's when we got the second van after about 2 or 3 years of the old van. And then the second van was a little better. It was like a 2005 or a 2006 model. It was silver. And that was the van that did not break. And we put 300,000 miles on and just drove across this country a billion times, every state, all 50 states, because we went to Hawaii at one point. We went to Alaska at one point. All 48 on the land here, back, forth, just, it never stopped. We were just, that's when we got a computer. I think it started writing 2008 or so, I believe, and we write in the van. We just sit with the van doors open and try to write using the little pod that I think I have sitting back there. I don't know, you can't really see it, but I have the original Line 6 pod, the little one that we used to record. So that pretty much sums up that. We just kept going. We were getting the momentum, and we had Kurt Angle, luckily, there, on the cover of the album, and he ended up wearing our shirt live on a WWE thing, and like that gave us more traction, and that was something that Tony was able to put together. We had nothing to do with Kurt Angle or really asked about it. I think Tony at Victory and the guys there had this idea, and something came together with that whole thing with Kurt Angle and the boxing gloves we sold and the mouth guard and all this crazy stuff with the merch, and it all came together, you know, and they were like, okay, that's a cool vibe, so we rocked with that for album number 2. All right, so that leads us to album number 3. But before I go into that, let me rewind. We were touring for the Respect issue, doing all types of tours, and Frank and Ben weren't getting along very well. We all kind of had a little bit of turmoil. You always will if you're elbow to elbow in a van with somebody forever and ever and ever. Then you go in a studio forever and ever, and you're always with somebody. And we made it so far, you know, from him and Ben 2003 to 2008-ish, 2009, and then we were at a venue called the People's Court, ironically. It was called the People's Court in Iowa. I think it was Iowa City. And it happened on stage. Something, I think Ben did a guitar throw, hit Frank in the face with his guitar, and said it was an accident, or I don't know if that happened earlier than that venue, but I think it was that tour, and it gave him a pretty good gash in his face. But then on stage, I just remember a scrim coming down and a squabble, and it was at the very end of the set, and somebody has footage of that. But either way, that was a moment where, unfortunately, I was always the one. I was kind of the middleman of the peacemaker, and I was the one that had to be in the middle of, you know, so that's when we had our first bus tour, actually. First or second time we ever rented a bus. And I was the one to be like, you know, hey, either Frank's coming back on the bus and Ben and Joe are out, we're done, or Ben and Joe has to go and Frank's gonna come on the bus. And I was just like, look, if Frank's not on the bus and he quits the band, I couldn't see this going forward anymore with a new singer, because I know how that usually goes. It's tough with a new singer. Some bands can do it though, and it's amazing. But I just was very, like, I don't know. We all talked about it. And then I remember Joe came on the bus. He's like, well, is that it? What are we doing? You know, if he leaves, if Ben goes, I'm going. And I was like, man, I mean, I love you guys. It's not working. We're having such turmoil. It's such turmoil. I can't see this continuing on. And said goodbye. That was it. They took their luggage. They flew home. And then we continued on the tour. And that's when I called my stepbrother, Mike Cobb. And he learned the songs with no practice, just kind of listening to it, learned the songs. And my brother, Michael Mahalan, not my real brother, but he's from the band Recon, who now plays in the Acacia Strain. But he was like, yeah, I'll fly out. So we flew them out pretty much the next day. And ironically, the next show was in Chicago for the Victory people and all these other people. And we were in the green room, backstage room, just practicing like to the album, playing out of like a boombox or something, like talking about the parts, telling Mike what to do, what part he would play. You know, Mike practicing on some pads, and we did a great show. No hiccups. It was really, really good, and I really appreciate them for that. So they did really good. And now moving forward to album number 3, we worked on the songs with Brian Goldsman at his house in Queens, and it was really easy for me and Frank to just kind of make laps from go get Frank, go to Brian's, go get Frank, go to Brian's. I think Mike came down because Mike lived in upstate New York, so he drove down maybe once or twice to work with us on it. It's tough to remember. And then at that point, you know, we had it all written, and then we reached out to our buddy Antoine Lessiere again. Antoine from Iron Dissonance, who did our EP, The Complete Guide to Needlework. We got him on board, and he's like, yep, let me see if I can get that studio again. And we did, and we went there. I think we went there for 4 or 5 weeks. Now, this studio is like 3.5 hours north of Montreal, so it was in the woods, Saint Zenon, Canada, in the middle of nowhere. It was like a 15-minute path just to get off the road to get to the studio, and we were in the middle of it for weeks and weeks and weeks. It drive you nuts. So it was challenging for us. As you can see here, losing my mind, and Antoine, we're just sitting there recording, having a blast. And we got that record done. And again, Mike, our drummer, my stepbrother, heard the songs about a week or two before we were going to go and learn them. And then in the studio, he did a great job. He performed, did what he had to do. And I would sometimes stand in the drum room silently while he's recording and like point at certain cymbals. I'd be like, that one. Or like if he didn't do something right, we'd stop and I'd explain it, and then he would go and we'd punch back in and keep cruising, and he'd finish the song and do do things. And a lot of people don't know, but that's like the magic in recording. Sometimes, somebody coaching somebody or having to just go punch back in and, getting a whole part done. And, it was organic. He was playing, and then we hit record and it would kind of overlap into the next part. And, helping Mike guide, point to certain cymbals. Like I was right in front of the drum set, helping him out in the drum room. Recorded that record. That was at the time controversial, where people hated it, people loved it, nothing really in the middle. I felt it was a great product for us. It was a great thing for us to put out and do. And then again, back on the road, bigger and bigger shows. And at that point, I've been using Ibanez guitars for a while. Got promo photos and magazines, all the good things like that. And, we were getting guitars. I think I was getting guitars for like cheaper than, I don't know. They were cheap. They weren't free yet. And then I think I got my first guitar, which is the black one, black RG 7-string. And then, moving forward, man, we had a great relationship with Ibanez. We were using SIT strings at the time. Shout out to Joe. He always hooked us up. And, the more and more we were doing stuff, we just slowly started getting, endorsements, which we had on the second record, but it was very slow. And then the snowball really picked up for record number 3. Again, doing the bigger shows. I think we did like 8 shows on Warped Tour 2009, I'm going to say, with A Day to Remember and a bunch of other bands. That was awesome. And that was the beginning of us getting offers to do really cool stuff. We've already been to Europe probably 4 times. 5 times. So we were just like having a real good time, and not really making money yet, but super excited that we're out there and able to do this. And I was living with my dad in Long Island, and everybody's living with their parents. Nobody was financially free, but we were doing what we loved. And here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Album number 4, Speaker of the Dead. My personal favorite record. We went to Joey Sturgis for this record, and again, rewinding a little bit before that, Ibanez put out a guitar called the RGD, and before anyone in the world was able to see it, I guess the consumer, the customer, I got an email from Mike Taft, who was my rep at the time, and he said, hey, we got this new guitar coming out, it's a 6/7 string. If you would be down to like represent it and be like, hey, I'm one of the faces of this guitar, we'll get you a custom LACS, Los Angeles custom. So I was weeping, crying at the time. I was so happy. I was like, it's so slim and rare. If you know out there how hard it is to get an actual LACS custom, however you want it built. He was like, you can do anything you want to this guitar, flip the headstock, this, but you can't change the shape of the body, because that's the RGD. It's a new RG. I was like, wow, yes, yeah. Before I even saw what it looked like, I was like, yes, I will do this. Yes, sign me up. Yes, please, as fast as you can. So I ended up going with that, and then they ended up putting me on a guitar beginner pack. Like they sold a guitar and a cable and a little thing. They put my face on these like things they sold at Guitar Center. I'm sure you probably have seen this if you play instruments. They sell these little packs. Fender makes it, Ibanez, where it's just like in a square box, and they put my face on that, and they took real good care of me, man. And my first LACS was that black one with the New York logo, and then moving down the road years later, or the next year, I got the white one with the logo. And every year I got a new one. It took about 14 months, and they gave me 5 of them total, and this is my favorite. This is the one that the Cobra, that I jam out on. But yeah, shout out to Ibanez, and Mike Taft in the beginning, then Mike Origo. He's my fellow Long Islander that moved out to California. He took care of me for years after that, would always come to shows. So now we have the custom guitars, we got strings, we got all types of cool stuff. I still had the antiquated pedal board that was just a mess. That was before we got into the axe effects and the ground control stuff. But either way, we wrote most of Speaker of the Dead on the computer, almost all of it. Me and Frank. Mark Davis had some ideas. I think he wrote pretty much most of, MDMA was the next record. But either way, Mark had some ideas that he definitely put forward, and we sat together and he would help arrange stuff a little. Mike Mulholland from upstate would send tracks, like almost full songs, and we would pick apart, add some stuff, change some things. And basically, we got that whole record together, ready to rock, almost all the way done. We were super stoked about it, and then we're like, let's go with Joey Sturgis. Like, Joey Sturgis is now the new, like he did, Asking Alexandria, Attack. A lot of bands that were really gaining momentum. The production is insane. His drum production is insane. We got good guitar tones, and we're like, all right, again, we're stoked. Good vocal production. So Joey was excited because all the bands that recorded with Joey were like, yo, we want to sound like EMMURE. So now here comes EMMURE going in Joey's studio saying, we want it to sound like the bands you record, but more. And man, Joey did a great job on that record. We stayed in Connorsville, Indiana, in his house. That's where his studio was. Things are a lot different now. He's doing really well. Back then, he was doing, I wouldn't say he's struggling, but, he was living with his parents in the house. And, it was a pretty medium older house and in the middle of Connorsville, Indiana. And we stayed there, and it was just Frank and myself. And at that point, I think Mike Cobb was not in the band anymore. We had Mark Castillo join, and he was with us for a few years, and he played the drums. And thanks to technology, we were able to use samples of drums he did and make the album perfect. So we only need Mark there for a little bit of time, and otherwise it was me and Frank. And every record, just for the record, I recorded all of the bass. I recorded about 95% of the guitars. Albums 1, 2, 3, and 4. Albums 1 and 2, Ben recorded a decent amount. He recorded a decent amount of some of the lead stuff that he wrote, and I didn't, like when I wrote the rhythm, so he did it. I just let him record it. But anything that had to be super tight, super heavy, I recorded. So Speaker of the Dead and Felony, I recorded all of the guitars, all of the bass. And Mike started helping out with certain stuff. He recorded a couple things, I think on Felony, but on Speaker of the Dead, he recorded a few things too. But either way, recorded that record, used my first custom guitar, loved the way it sounded. Joey was using the Pod Farm at the time. I'm like, how on earth are you going to get good tone? Like, where's the big amps and the cabs? And we're like, no, we're going direct. We're going to use a cab simulator. And I was like, all right. And what you hear is what you get. Speaker of the Dead is literally using the little pod, the little tiny nothing pod, using Pod Farm, and Joey was able to make it work good. So I repeat again, we did not use amps for Speaker of the Dead or Slave to the Game. We used Pod Farm. So, wow, right? He did a great job. We smashed that out, and then we started doing bigger tours, man. We were doing the festivals in Europe, 7,000 people, 10,000 people, 12,000, and the biggest show yet, 37,000 people we played to. That was when Randy from Lamb of God got arrested in the Czech Republic, and we happened to be playing a festival they were supposed to play, and we ended up getting their slot in the main stage, and that was the biggest thing we ever did. And it was great. It wasn't even nerve-wracking because there's so many people, you can't even like pick a face out, so you're just running around this huge stage having a good time. At that point, we've done Warped Tour again. We're doing all these other things. We got John Blake from On Broken Wings. He was our tour manager. He did a good job for us. And we had my good friend Chops, who played bass in a couple of bands in Connecticut. He played in Recon, which was Mike's band. So he was our guitar tech, and he still is a brother of mine and did a great job. He's out there with Thy Art Is Murder. He does a lot of different things, so he's still out there touring. But yeah, I mean, what else can I say? We were doing great. I was getting the custom guitars, and we were, doing tons and tons of tours, playing to the big crowds. I mean, we even played, we did a tour with Five Finger Death Punch, Killswitch Engage, Trivium, and we were doing arenas, and we were able to play here at the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville. We played a bunch of arenas, and we were in an RV for 7 weeks, so that was painful. But Man, so much to talk about, and I really appreciate all of you. That's going to wrap it up for this one. And again, please leave comments, any questions, and we'll probably do one more video to wrap this up, I think, because this is there's a lot to talk about. So thank you so much again, and you guys have a great weekend. Peace.